Here's a radical idea. Being polyamorous does not make you a better person. It doesn't excuse harm, dilute accountability, or upgrade your moral status. Polyamory is a relationship structure, not a spiritual practice. But somehow, in poly spaces, we've created a culture where behavior that would be obviously unacceptable in monogamy gets reframed as enlightenment. That's just jealousy. I don't believe in obligation. You're asking for hierarchy. These phrases shut down conversations instead of opening them. They're conversation enders, not conversation starters. And today, we're calling that out. When polyamory language gets weaponized to avoid responsibility, dodge repair, and launder harm. Welcome to Untamed Ember. I'm your host, Dr. Misty, and today's episode is about how non-monogamy ethics require more accountability, not less. If you're new here, this podcast is where we blend science, story, and rebellion to help you unlearn shame and build unapologetic connection. We talk about kink, polyamory, and real-world relationship dynamics without the pearl clutching or pity parties. And if you've been here before, you know I don't sugarcoat things. So buckle up, because today we're having the conversation that a lot of poly spaces desperately need to hear. Let's start by naming the pattern directly. Some people use poly language to avoid dealing with their own shit. And I mean that with all the clinical precision and therapeutic love I can muster. I see this in my practice all the time. Someone discovers polyamory and suddenly they think they've transcended human emotional complexity. They think that because they can conceptually understand compersion and use words like metamor correctly, they've somehow evolved beyond the need for basic relational skills like communication, accountability, and repair. But here's the thing. Structure doesn't equal character. Having multiple relationships doesn't make you more enlightened any more than having multiple jobs makes you more industrious. It just means you have multiple relationships. That's literally it. So let me bust this myth once and for all. Polyamory is not a moral upgrade. It's not a sign that you're more evolved, more secure, or more enlightened than monogamous people. It's a relationship structure. And like any structure, it's only as strong as the people building it and the skills they bring to the construction site. Now, from a nervous system perspective, what often happens is this. People who struggle with attachment, conflict, or intimacy discover polyamory and think it's going to fix those issues without them having to do the actual work. Dysregulated nervous systems often seek complexity as a way to avoid depth, not create it. Think about it. If you struggle with intimacy, having multiple surface-level connections can feel easier than having one deep one. If you're conflict avoidant, you can always escape to another relationship when things get hard. If you have an anxious attachment style, you might think that having multiple sources of validation will regulate your system. And listen, I'm not judging those impulses. Our nervous systems are doing their best to keep us safe with the tools that they have. But we have to be honest about what's actually happening here. The problem comes when people don't do the work of understanding their own patterns and instead use polyamory language as a shield against feedback, accountability, and growth. I had a new client once tell me, "My old therapist said I need to work on my avoidant attachment, but I think she just doesn't understand polyamory." And I was like, honey, those are two completely different things. You can be securely attached and polyamorous, or avoidantly attached and polyamorous. The structure doesn't fix the wiring. So when someone uses phrases like, "I don't believe in obligation," to avoid showing up for their partners, or "that's just your jealousy," to dismiss valid concerns, what they're really doing is using enlightenment language as a way to avoid doing their own emotional labor. And the result? Instead of developing actual relational skills, they develop a really sophisticated vocabulary for avoiding accountability. Instead of learning how to repair when they cause harm, they learn how to make the person they harmed feel like the problem. Being poly doesn't make you Gandhi, folks. It makes you someone who has multiple relationships. And multiple relationships require multiple times that communication, multiple times the accountability, and multiple times the repair skills. Not less, more. All right, let's get specific about how this shows up. Because once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. And that's a good thing, because awareness is the first step towards demanding better. There are 3 main ways I see polyamory language get weaponized in relationships, and I want to walk through each one with you. The first pattern is neglect, framed as autonomy. This is when someone uses the language of independence and self-determination to justify behavior that's actually just not showing up. Let me paint you a picture. You've been dating someone for 6 months. You've had conversations about wanting consistent communication, maybe a text during the day or a check-in call a few times a week. Nothing unreasonable. But suddenly, they disappear for 3 days without a word. When you bring it up, instead of, "I'm sorry, I was overwhelmed and I should have communicated that," you get, "I don't believe in being obligated to check in. That's codependent. I need my autonomy." Or maybe you're in the middle of a difficult conversation about something that has happened between you two, and they just leave, walk out, stop responding to texts, go radio silent. When you finally reconnect, instead of acknowledgement and repair, you get, "I don't do drama. I needed space to process." Here's the thing. Autonomy governs choice, not consequence. You absolutely get to choose how much you communicate, how much emotional energy you invest, how much availability you have. Those are your choices to make. But you don't get to choose the impact of those choices on other people. You don't get to be chronically unresponsive and then act surprised when people stop trusting your word. You don't get to disappear during every conflict and then wonder why your relationships lack intimacy. From a polyvagal perspective, what's happening here is that someone's nervous system goes into dorsal shutdown or a sympathetic fight or flight when faced with relational demands, and instead of developing capacity to stay present during discomfort, they use autonomy language to justify the exit. And look, I get it. Sometimes we need space. Sometimes we're overwhelmed. Sometimes we genuinely don't have the bandwidth for the level of connection someone is asking for. Those are all valid experiences. The difference is in how you handle it. Saying, "I'm feeling overwhelmed right now and I need some space to regulate. Can we reconnect in X amount of time?" is taking responsibility. Saying, "I don't believe in obligation," is using philosophy to avoid accountability. The second pattern is dishonesty reframed as privacy. This one's trickier because the line between privacy and transparency in polyamory is genuinely complex. But there's a difference between protecting your inner experience and withholding information that affects other people's ability to make informed choices about their own lives. Privacy protects your inner experience. Your thoughts, your feelings, your personal history, your processing time. Those are yours to share or not share as you choose. But consent cannot exist without materially relevant information. If you change an agreement without discussing it, if you start a new relationship that affects the risk profile or time allocation in existing relationships, if you have unprotected sex with someone new, that's not your private inner experience anymore. That's information other people need to make informed choices about their own bodies, their own time, their own emotional reality. I see this show up as lying by omission under the banner of "I don't owe anyone details," or making unilateral changes to the agreements and informing partners after the fact with "I need to follow my authentic truth," or withholding STI information with "that's not your business." If your idea of autonomy requires other people to consent to things they don't know about, that's not autonomy, that's coercion. When you withhold information that would materially affect someone's choices, you're not protecting your privacy. You're removing their ability to give informed consent. You're making choices for them by limiting what they know. The third pattern is coercion disguised as growth. And this one might be the most insidious because it sounds so reasonable on the surface. This is when someone frames their partner's discomfort, boundaries, or needs as personal work that their partner needs to do, rather than information to be negotiated with. If you're uncomfortable with me dating your best friend, that's your jealousy to work through. If you can't handle me having unprotected sex with other people, you need to examine your controlling tendencies. If you're upset that I forgot our anniversary because I was on a date, you're being possessive. Notice what's happening here. The person causing the impact isn't taking any responsibility for their choices. Instead, they're making their partner's response to those choices the partner's problem to solve. Now, it's true that in healthy relationships, we all have to do personal work. We all have triggers, insecurities, and growth edges. But there's a huge difference between supporting someone through their discomfort and demanding that they endure harm as proof of their growth. Supporting someone through discomfort sounds like, I hear that this is hard for you. Help me understand what would make this feel safer. Demanding endurance sounds like, if you really loved me, you'd get over this. And here's the thing that really gets me. Treating someone's decision to leave as evidence of their personal failings rather than an autonomous choice. If you can't handle polyamory, maybe you're just not evolved enough. You're letting your insecurity win. Or, I thought you were more mature than this. That's manipulation language. It's designed to make someone question their own boundaries instead of questioning whether the situation they're being asked to accept is actually acceptable. So, those are the three big patterns: neglect framed as autonomy, dishonesty reframed as privacy, and coercion disguised as growth. And the common thread: using polyamory language to make the person experiencing harm responsible for fixing it, while the person causing the harm gets to claim neutral ground. I'm not saying these patterns are inherent to polyamory or that polyamory itself is the problem. The problem is how some of our discourse around polyamory has created conditions where these patterns can flourish unchecked. A lot of popular polyamory advice overemphasizes jealousy management and self-soothing without equally emphasizing accountability, care, and repair. We spend so much time talking about how to manage your reactions to your partner's other relationships that we sometimes forget to talk about how to be a partner worth reacting to in the first place. And the result is this culture where the person naming harm gets framed as the problem, while the person causing harm gets to claim neutrality. I'm just living authentically. You're the one with the emotional reaction. But from a polyvagal perspective, when someone's nervous system is activated by harm, telling them it's just jealousy is gaslighting disguised as growth. Their nervous system is giving them information. Something doesn't feel safe. Maybe that information isn't always accurate, but dismissing it entirely teaches people to distrust their own embodied wisdom. And we've created this hierarchy where certain emotions are more acceptable than others. Compersion? Great. Joy in your partner's joy? Beautiful. Anxiety about agreements being changed without discussion? Well, that's just your jealousy talking. But here's what I want you to understand. All emotions are information. Even the uncomfortable ones. Even the ones that challenge the relationship structure you've chosen. Even the ones that point towards real problems that need addressing. So let me tell you about Jenna. She came to therapy after her partner Ari started dating someone new without discussing it first. They'd been together for 2 years, had explicit agreements about meeting new partners before dating them, and had built what she thought was a solid foundation of trust and communication. But one day, Ari came home and said, I met someone last week, and we've been hanging out. I really like them, and we're going to start dating. When Jenna expressed hurt and confusion about the agreement they'd made, Ari responded with, I don't believe in asking permission, and you're trying to control me. Jenna spent months convinced she was the problem. She read every polyamory book she could find. She worked on her jealousy. She tried to examine her controlling tendencies. She questioned whether she was really cut out for non-monogamy. And you know what we discovered in therapy? Consent requires information. And surprise is not the same as freedom. Ari hadn't made an autonomous choice to start dating someone new. Ari had made a unilateral choice to change the agreements in their relationship without discussion. And then Ari used polyamory language to make Jenna feel like her completely reasonable response to a boundary violation was a personal failing. The damage of this pattern goes so much deeper than individual relationships. People internalize that their responses to harm are pathology rather than information. They learn to doubt their own nervous systems. They develop a tolerance for treatment that should be intolerable. And if you're listening to this and recognize yourself in Jenna's story, I want you to know your nervous system's response to harm is not jealousy, it's intelligence. All right, so we've talked about what ethical polyamory isn't. Now let's talk about what it actually is. Because here's the thing. When we stop using enlightenment language to dodge responsibility, we can build relationships that are actually sustainable, actually consensual, and actually hot. Ethical polyamory isn't measured by how many relationships you can maintain, how little jealousy you feel, or how free you appear. It's measured by whether people feel informed, respected, and genuinely free to say no. So let me break down what that looks like in practice. First, clear agreements that match real capacity, not fantasy. And I cannot emphasize this enough. No one has infinite resources. You don't have infinite time, you don't have infinite emotional bandwidth, you don't have infinite energy for processing, for dates, for text conversations, for emotional labor. And pretending otherwise doesn't make you more evolved, it makes you a bad planner. I see people all the time who want to date like they're 22 with no responsibilities while managing the calendar complexity of a Fortune 500 CEO. It doesn't work. Your agreements need to be based on your actual life, not your fantasy of your life. This means being honest about how much time you actually have for dating, how much emotional bandwidth you have for processing multiple relationships, how your existing commitments, your work schedule, your parenting responsibilities, your health needs, your introversion or extroversion, all of that factors into what you can realistically offer. And it means building agreements that acknowledge these constraints instead of pretending like they don't exist. If you can only see a new partner once a week, say that up front. If you need processing time after dates with other people before you're emotionally available again, build that into your schedule. Second, communication before decisions, not after. This one should be obvious, but apparently it needs to be said. If your choice affects someone else's risk, time, or emotional reality, they get to know about it before it happens, not after. This isn't about asking permission. It's about informed consent. If you want to start dating someone new, if you want to change the safer sex agreements you have with existing partners, if you want to spend your anniversary with someone else instead of your nesting partner, those are conversations that happen before decisions get made. And I know this can feel restrictive if you're coming from a place of feeling controlled in previous relationships. But there's a difference between someone trying to control your choices and someone asking to be informed about choices that affect them. Think about it this way. If your roommate decided to move out without telling you, you wouldn't think, oh, they're just exercising their autonomy. You'd think, they left me in a really difficult position by not giving me any heads up. Same principle applies to relationships. Third, repair that centers impact over intent. When someone is harmed in your relationships, the first response needs to be care and responsibility, not defensiveness about your motivation. This is where a lot of people get it backwards. They think that if their intention was good, the impact doesn't matter. Or they think that explaining their intention somehow undoes the impact. But that's not how nervous systems work. If I step on your foot, it doesn't matter if I intended to step on your foot or not. Your foot still hurts. My job isn't to convince you that your foot doesn't actually hurt because I didn't mean to step on it. My job is to get off your foot, acknowledge that I hurt you, and figure out how to avoid stepping on your foot in the future. Same thing in relationships. Impact is impact, regardless of intent. And if your response to someone telling you that they're hurt is to immediately explain why you didn't mean to hurt them, you're prioritizing your own comfort over their experience of harm. So here's a tool I teach all of my clients, the impact check. When conflict arises, before you explain your intent, before you defend your choices, before you do anything else, you ask, what was the impact on you? And then you listen. You really listen. Not listen to respond, but listen to understand. Listen until the person feels heard, and then you take responsibility for that impact, even if it wasn't your intention. Fourth, willingness to hear, this doesn't work for me, without a debate, correction, or retaliation. Someone opting out is not a failure of polyamory. It's not evidence of their insecurity or their inability to grow. It's an autonomous choice that deserves respect. And this is where so many people's polyamory ethics show their true colors. It's easy to talk about autonomy and choice when everybody's choosing what you want them to choose. It's much harder to respect autonomy when someone chooses something that's inconvenient for you. If someone says, I'm not comfortable with you dating my coworker, and your response is to explain why their discomfort is unreasonable, you don't actually respect their autonomy. You respect their autonomy only when they use it in ways you approve of. If someone says this relationship structure isn't working for me and I need to step back, and your response is to convince them they're letting fear win, you don't actually believe in their right to self-determination. Real autonomy means people get to make choices you don't like. Real consent means people get to change their minds. Real ethical non-monogamy means accepting that not everyone is going to choose what's most convenient for you. And finally, measuring your ethical non-monogamy by respect, not performance. This isn't about how enlightened you look from the outside. It's about how safe people feel on the inside. The question isn't, how many relationships can I maintain? Or how little jealousy do I feel? The question is, do the people in my life feel informed, respected, and genuinely free to say no without retaliation? Because if the answer to that question is no, then it doesn't matter how good your compersion game is. It doesn't matter how sophisticated your calendar management system is. It doesn't matter how many polyamory books you've read. You're not practicing ethical non-monogamy. You're practicing relationship structure with good marketing. All right, before we wrap up, I want to give you some space to pause and notice what's coming up for you as we've been talking about this. Think about a time when someone used enlightened sounding language to avoid accountability with you. Maybe it was, that's just your jealousy, or I don't believe in obligation, or you're being codependent. And I want you to notice what that felt like in your body when it happened. Where did you feel tight? Where did your breath go? Did your stomach drop? Did your chest constrict? Did you feel heat in your face or cold in your hands? Don't judge whatever you find there. Just notice it. Our bodies hold the truth of our experiences, even when our minds get confused by sophisticated language. Now, imagine what it would have felt like if that same person had said, I hear that this hurt you. Help me understand how. Notice the difference. Notice how one response makes you feel seen and the other makes you feel crazy. Notice how one response opens space for conversation and the other shuts it down. That difference you're feeling, that's the difference between being gaslit and being seen. That's the difference between polyamory as spiritual bypassing and polyamory as ethical practice. And if you're recognizing patterns in your own relationships where enlightenment language has been used to shut down your valid concerns, I want you to trust that recognition. Your nervous system is giving you valuable information. So here's what I want you to take away from today's conversation. Polyamory is not a moral upgrade. It's a relationship structure that requires more communication, more accountability, and more repair than monogamy, not less. When we stop using enlightenment language to dodge responsibility, when we stop making the person experiencing harm responsible for fixing it, when we start centering impact alongside intent, we can build relationships that are actually sustainable, actually consensual, and actually hot. Ethical non-monogamy is not about how many people can you love simultaneously. It's about how well you can love the people who trust you with their hearts, their bodies, their time, and their vulnerability. If today's episode gave you language for calling out weaponized polydiscourse in your own life, if it helped you recognize patterns that you've been tolerating, if it reminded you that your responses to harm are information rather than pathology, then I've done my job. Subscribe to Untamed Ember wherever you get your podcasts because we're just getting started with these conversations. Join my newsletter at untamedember.kit.com for deeper dives, practical tools, and the behind-the-scenes content that doesn't make it into the podcast. And if you want hands-on practice with these concepts and many others, check out untamedember.com for our on-demand workshops. Because your relationships deserve structure that serves connection, not avoidance. They deserve agreements that create safety, not confusion. And they deserve repair that centers love, not defensiveness. I'm Dr. Misty. This has been Untamed Ember, and I'll see you next time for more science, story, and rebellion in service of your unapologetic connection.